Hello everyone, it's Kevin with VintiqueSound.com, and today I'm going to list out 5 reasons why I use Cubase for mixing. So number 1 is a huge one for me, and that is the MixConsole. So this is great to work with and to be able to just customize your entire view, the way that it looks, what is being shown at what point in time. So for instance, you have the metering on the right-hand side, and it's just a click away to hide it. Same thing with the left part of the window. There's a visibility section that you can kind of configure, a history pane, a snapshots pane, but all of these things can kind of just be tucked away. But even more than that, you can even go into this section and take away all the different channel types, list only the audio channels if you want, add in the group channels if that's important, or effects channels. I find this is very handy for instance, if I'm doing like editing and the very first part of the mixing session. I really don't need to have group tracks kind of pinned to the side as I scroll on the left hand here with all the other tracks. So what I can do is just get rid of the group tracks altogether. I'll have just my output, and then I have a huge screen space of all the different tracks that I'm working with and mixing. And I'm not so much focused on doing like group channel processing. That usually comes later in my mixing process. So that is really handy. You can also just configure a setup and save it and then switch between those setups. You can also open up more than just one MixConsole window. So the hotkey F3 opens up the main MixConsole, and then there is a second one that opens up with MixConsole 2, and you can go all the way up to 4 different MixConsoles. So you can have a static setup for one MixConsole, your main one, open up a second MixConsole that is itself configured and set up in some static way, and so on and so forth for up to 4 different MixConsoles. So that is really handy for setup. There's also in the entire sort of insert and routing and all that kind of stuff, you can configure this entire window with this right-hand button here, this setup window layout. So again, there's the left-hand zone, right-hand zone. There's also mixer channel overview, this section. So you can quickly drag here. You see all the different audio inputs on the left-hand side, the audio outputs on the right-hand side here. And all those tracks that we're playing, you can kind of just see a general overview of the levels. There's also a meter bridge. There's also the equalizer curve. So this is the built-in Cubase EQ from the channel. So anything that you make for EQ changes here, it will reflect in this little mini window. And you can, instead of opening up the whole channel strip or whatever it is, or going into the EQ section in the console here, you can have just a pinned top level view of the EQ. And when you click on it, it maximizes it. So it's just like working in the channel overview. You can make your changes and you just hover away from it and it goes away. So it just makes it really easy to get in there, make some EQ changes, whatever it is, hover away and it's gone. There's a notepad that you can have for each channel, just have like different notes. And then there's all the other sections that you can customize. There's the hardware section, if you have that set up in Cubase. There's the routing section, the pre section, modulators, inserts, etc., etc. You can really get it to be, really filled up here, or you can have it very trimmed down, whatever you like. You can even put pictures in there. You can show the channel latency, which is just an overview of the entire latency of all the plugins that you have inserted on that particular channel. And you can even take away the fader. So it's very, very customizable. I like that a lot. I used to use Pro Tools, which was very static. You couldn't really configure it in any way. It may have changed nowadays, but I just remember it being very limited. Another thing that I really like is the sort of like global functions, I guess you could say. So this is the Q link, which is effectively a way to apply changes to many tracks at a time when you have it enabled, and when you have it disabled, it doesn't do that to every track that's selected. And it's nice to have a button that toggles between those two, because let's say I have tracks that I've highlighted and just kind of forgot that they were highlighted, and I want to make a change to this track, which has the same plugin as the track that's next to it. I don't want to have it applied to both tracks unless I intentionally want that and I know I'm doing that. So if the Q link is enabled, by default, it's going to apply that change to both of them. If I know that it's enabled, I can disable it by clicking the Alt button. You could see this suspend all channel linking. That kind of just shows up, and then you make changes to the channel, release it, it goes back to being Q linked, and then you're on your merry way. So you don't have to constantly click the button on and off. So that's nice. There's also global features such as the deactivate section here, or I guess it's a deactivate/activate. So for instance, I have the parallel compression muted here. If I click this button, it disables all the mutes that are active in the project. Same thing goes for, let's say, solos. If I'm deep in soloing, all I have to do is just reach up here and click this deactivate all solos, and then I'm good to go. So again, that's true for the listen. That's true for the reads, for all the automation. There's deactivate all. So it kind of just goes both ways for the automation stuff. So if we go into an area with automation, if you want to disable automation globally, you could do that here by suspending. Now it's not going to follow the automation. It's kind of just bypassing it. It's not getting rid of it, but it just bypasses it so that the value here is static and controllable. So you can make adjustments on the fly without affecting your already predefined and configured automation. Then when you're done with it, you just globally disable the automation disable function, and then you can just make sure that all the automation is in the read mode. So that is very powerful. There's also this section here. So this is another version of this, but this is for all these different modules. So this is the bypass for modulators section, for the inserts, for the EQs, for the channel strips, and for the sends. So this is also really, really handy. At one click of a button, I can get rid of all the send effects or all the inserts. So if you could see whatever processing I have, most of it is in the inserts. I don't tend to use the Cubase EQ quite as much as I used to, partly because I really, really like hardware emulation, and this UAD API Vision channel strip is really, really nice. But either way, you have global function to enable and disable all of these elements within the project, and it's super handy. And another thing that you can do is you could right click on one of these sections and click expand sections exclusively. So if you click on another section, like the pre, it keeps everything else closed and just opens up that section. So if you untick this, you'll see that the inserts remains open. It takes up a lot of screen space. So that's a nice feature for just keeping everything nice and snug and controlled. And I'll go a little bit more in depth with configuring the left hand and right hand side and pinned tracks. So for instance, what I tend to do is I'll set up the project for a mix, and I'll have all my regular audio tracks, I'll have effects tracks and stuff like that. And then I'll want to sum them down to a group track of some sort. And each of those group tracks, I kind of treat them at the very least as a logical sort of framework. If not, then I'm actually doing some processing on that group track. But essentially what I want is, if I'm midway or towards the end of a mix, I want to be able to make adjustments both to individual tracks of, let's say, the drums, and I want to be able to either do solos or whatever, but then I want to be able to process individual tracks and the group tracks at the same time and just see the entire picture. And if I do, let's say, a solo on just the drums, I could see that reflect here, and I'm pinning all those group tracks on the right hand side. So it just keeps things like very neat and organized. I have this general bigger overview always pinned to the right hand side, which is this section here. And then everything else is loosely coupled, and I can scroll and make different changes on the left hand side. And to do this, what you do is you go into the left hand pane, into the visibility tab, you select whatever channels that you want, and there's this zones feature. Everything that you want on the right hand side, you use the right hand little dot, and that's what pins it to the right. If it's in the center, it just remains in this section and is scrollable. If you pin it to the left hand side, it does the same sort of thing where it doesn't scroll, but it pins it on the left hand. So I find that is actually really handy for input tracks. So if I'm doing a recording session, you could see here, this is my microphone. You could pin it to the left-hand side, and then you see all your input tracks. And as you scroll, it just stays there. You always have somewhere to monitor your inputs. So I really like that feature. And a couple more things to add here. So the MixConsole has a built-in history for the active session that you're in. So all those EQ changes that I made, I can go back in time, flip between individual setting changes, and go back, and wherever I stop and continue making other changes, it kind of just gets rid of that future stuff that you applied. So just be aware of that. And you can also just very quickly click and drag to scroll through all these different versions. And related to this is you can take a snapshot of the mixer settings, which includes all of the sort of built-in Cubase related processing, all the inserts, the levels, all that kind of stuff. You can take a snapshot and it will save it to the project globally. And then even if you make other changes along the way, you can always go back to that snapshot and reload it. So this is great if you want to just have one single project file and then you make slight adjustments. Let's say it was a client that wanted adjustments to a couple of the instruments, like some of the processing. You can have a Mix Revision 1 version, a Mix Revision 2 version, and it's all built within the project, and it's easy to just quickly save and reload different snapshots. So I'll do just a quick demonstration. It includes send effects. It includes the built-in Cubase channel strip processing, and it also includes all the inserts and stuff, even if you copy over plugins, remove plugins, it keeps that in the history, and that is something you're able to do a snapshot of. So we made all these changes. If we restore this one, you will see that it removed the plugin. The send effect is back to 0. It will be reflected in the history it's not going to just jump back in time in this sense. Then if we go back to this, you can see we're back to the adjusted send and inserts and EQ and such. So very nice, very handy, and I like that a lot. And for number 2, that is the control room in Cubase. And for anyone that's not familiar with what control room is, it's basically a section in the program that allows you to configure a bunch of inputs and outputs that gives you a lot of control over all those different devices like you would have in an actual control room. So for instance, you'd have different control features for your studio monitors, your headphone outputs, your cue mixes. There's a talkback mic section. There's also adjustments for the click channel track and ability to add insert plugins to all these different outputs. So I'll kind of walk through that after I walk through the setup section. So if you go into Studio and Audio Connections, there's a tab that is the control room section. I have 2 studio monitors set up and their respective outputs. I also have a pair of headphones and a cue mix set up as well. I have the ability to send that talkback mic to any output that I want. Now, the beauty of this is that you have the ability to switch seamlessly between all of these different outputs and enable or disable many different things, including that actual output itself. So for instance, when I'm doing a mix, I usually want to hear on my main monitors the Neumann KH310s for a lot of the time, but I often also want to switch to my Avantone mix cubes, and I can do that by just a click of a button. It instantly switches between the 2 different monitors. I also have the ability to make it a summed down from stereo down to mono signal. And I have the ability to do that individually too. So I can keep one set of monitors mono, the other one stays stereo unless I switch that one as well. So that is very, very handy to get different perspectives when you're in the mixing process. Another thing that's really nice is you can switch between your actual mix. So in this case, I have the studio monitor outputs as the mix, but I can send a cue mix to whatever output I want. So let's say I have a artist doing a recording, I can give them the headphones, have a cue mix set up, have my talkback mic enabled, and then have them listen to the cue mix instead of just the mix itself. And this is very common with, let's say, a vocalist. They'll want to hear their voice with reverb and delay or something. And you can balance out the instruments separately from the actual mix. So maybe they just want to hear more kick, snare, bass, and like lead or something, because those are the main elements of rhythm and melody. And again, there's just a click away from doing activating or deactivating an output, switching between the cues in the mix, doing level adjustments, adding in or removing the metronome. There's also individual click levels and listen levels and panning and all this different stuff in here. It's really, really nice. There's also, so not only that, but you can also do insert plugins for each individual output. So for instance, what I like to do is for my main monitors, I like to have it at full output capacity, so to speak, at 0 dB output. And I might actually like to have SonarWorks reference plugin enabled so that I have that final room tuning output signal. But this is only applied to the output signal. It's not actually applied to the final output from the DAW itself, so to speak. Like when I do a export, it's not exporting the SonarWorks plugin, the way that it like manipulates the sound and the EQ and the phase or whatever. That's never applied to the export. And it's also never applied to this mix signal. So it is literally purely only applied to that output itself. And when I switch over to my Avantone Mix Cubes, that has a whole different section of insert plugins. So I can have two different versions of SonarWorks even if I wanted to. And then again, I can also reduce the signal going out from that output. So I find my Mix Cubes, they have a volume adjustment on the back of them. There's not a lot of different settings, and the minute you go to the next volume setting, it jumps a lot. And I don't really like that because when I switch from the current setting to a lower setting, it's too quiet. And if I go to the current setting, it's too loud. So I set it individually here with the input gain down by 5 dB, and it matches my other monitors, which are set at 0 dB output. So on that same note, you can do the same individual processing on the Q-Mix, on your talkback mic, on your headphones as well, down here. And then on top of all of that, there's also another section, which is more of like a global feature or a global insert section. So what I like to put here is the mastering the mix reference to plugin. So you can load different reference tracks and then switch between your actual output from the project and then the reference track. And you can do it with a click of a button. And this is really nice because I want to have that globally for all monitors and switch between it, have it, let's say, on the reference track and switch between different monitors and then go back to the original track. And I also like having the monitoring of that final output as well. So visually, phase, etc. I want to monitor not only my original track, but the reference tracks that I'm looking at. And I can chain these plugins in that fashion. And it's completely separate from the actual processing. So I'll never accidentally export my reference track. So it is all just kind of nice and neatly separated in all these different sections. And I've never seen this level of control in any other DAW. So needless to say, this is another major reason why I still use Cubase for mixing. Now for number 3. So this is primarily the export feature in Cubase. So I really, really like the way they've done the exporting in Cubase. It's an entire separate section that has all these different features if you really get into it. So let's start with this section. So there's the single versus multiple channel selection. So if I'm doing a regular mix, I'm just exporting to a stereo mix, which is my global mix output, which is here. But I can also go in and do, let's say, stem exports. And I can go into all the mix tracks that I have. So not mains, because that's a different type of group track. These are the final output tracks that are basically designated as like a stem track. So I can select all of those individually and click export, or I can go to the single export individually and I can actually export Q and add that to the queue. Go to this track here, the mix base, add that to the queue, and then start the queue export. Those are two different ways of doing the same thing. Another beautiful thing is its combination with the marker track. So you can do the export just by your locators, which is here, and just kind of configure them manually, so to speak. There's also the cycle markers. So these here, these are loops that I've created. This is like a loop that encompasses the entire song. And then there's different sections, like a verse loop. I can export those not only like separately or individually, but I can also select to just export those all at the same time. I could add those to the queue. And you'll notice that in the queue, I actually have control over the file formats. So you could see this is a 48 kilohertz project, and you can select whatever output you want, and it will save that as the queue setting. So you can go in here, do a wave export of 44.1 if that's what you wanted to do. Keep it the same if you wanted to. Add that to the queue. So now I have two versions of the output at different sample rates. I could then go and do a MP3 export. I could do different bit rates. So there's different MP3 bitrate exports, add those to the queue. It also encompasses the file location and file naming scheme. You could see here it's saving that and adding the file name, the file path, and all that stuff. So all these things you can individually customize, add them to the queue, do it all in one shot, click the Start Queue Export, and leave. And let's say you had like 20 minutes of exports, you could just queue them up, export, and leave. So that I really, really like. The other thing that's great about this is you can have these sort of systematic ways of dealing with export and naming and stuff. So I will start a project, I'll add some of these marker points, and I'll always add at least one loop marker, which marks the entire song export. And then when I go and export the song, this can be locked so that the the section of where that loop is never gets changed accidentally. If my locators get changed, I could just double click on a loop and get back to that particular loop section very, very quickly. And then I can actually name this loop marker, like the artist and the song and whatever extra information. Click the cycle marker for export. Use that as a naming scheme for the file export. So here I have the cycle marker name plus this added extra name section. So when I'm exporting this, let's say I do a proper wave for a mix for a client, and I have a naming scheme, I have the loop marker set so that with every mix, I could just recreate the exact same start and end points. I could have the exact same beginning part of the name or the naming scheme. And all I would have to do is just update the next mix number and the date. Let's say it was that. So all of this is kind of just configured or pre-configured into the project, and it has a really, really nice workflow. And then you can also do real-time export if that was a priority for you. So yeah, needless to say, that is another really, really handy, mostly workflow-related thing with Cubase's exporting. All right, so number 4 is the rock-solid audio engine and the Asio Guard that's built into Cubase. So this doesn't make quite as much of a difference now that I have a much more powerful and up-to-date computer. But before I was using a computer like a desktop computer that was pretty fully spec'd out, but it was a Generation 4 Intel i7 processor. So it was really showing its age. And the number of insert plugins that I could use on a project was actually quite high. I never really hit the limit, at least not with Cubase, and especially not with the Asio Guard. So it does add some latency, but there's some sort of magic behind the scenes where it really, really eliminates a lot of clicks and pops and just a bunch of like potential buffering issues or something going on. I've done some sort of like playing around, troubleshooting, comparisons between Cubase and Bitwig and Ableton, and I always found that the number of plugins, including synthesizers and just insert plugins like a compressor or UAD plugins, even the hardware-based UAD plugins, the amount of those that I could use in a project in Ableton or Bitwig versus Cubase, I could always get way more on Cubase, and then just the number of weird things going on with the audio outputs, like clicks and pops and stuff like that, dropouts. I find it's much less common in Cubase. At least that's been my experience. I'm on a Windows machine. Windows 11 doesn't seem to be as stable as Windows 10 was, but even with that sort of lack of stability by moving up to Windows 11, I still get like a really, really rock solid audio output. And now with this new desktop that I have, it's much, much quicker and can handle way more processing than my last computer. I can do so much processing, and my exporting even on this computer is so much faster. So needless to say, it's the fact that I have such little troubles with the audio engine and just a sort of rock solid experience for years and years now. I've just had such little issues with audio outputs and clicks and pops and dropouts and all that kind of stuff. And for number 5, that's going to be the import tracks from projects feature. So I'm not familiar with how other DAWs either attempt this, if they do. But the way that Steinberg implemented this is actually really quite nice. I found myself using this feature a lot, especially when I have an album to work on. So whenever I get clients, I do have like a sort of template setup where I have like different colors. I have a template in the sense of having mix tracks like I was showing before. These are like the final group tracks, essentially like the stems of a track. I have specific routing. I have different effects and stuff. But within an album, that's even more so true in the sense that I'm trying to get a particular sound, typically, on an album that is consistent throughout that the whole album. So oftentimes I'll have different processors like effects processing or insert plugins. I will probably not use the exact same settings unless it's been recorded in a very similar way, intentionally trying to get the same sound. Then I might try to use the same processing if it was recorded in the same session, in the same way, etc. But at the very least, what I can do is I can import the tracks from another project. I'll just demonstrate this. Let's go with this. So typically what I would do is I'd go into the project and import the tracks that I have the processing that I want to recreate, and probably also the group tracks and effects tracks that I kind of just want to re-emulate. So for instance, the kick, if there's 2 for some reason, snare and all of their group tracks associated with it. Maybe there's a specific guitar processing that I really like, and I can do the individual track, the group track that it's being sent to, and it'll preserve the setup in the output setting, or the routing, I should say. And then I can grab a specific effects plugin, like if there's a reverb for the drums that is just really, really good and I want to preserve that sound, I can import that from the previous track or from the previous project. And then I can also do the global output processing if I happen to do that. Now, what's also nice is that I have control of not just the track kind of in a general sense. I can import the events and the parts if I wanted to, but typically in the scenario that I'm describing, I don't need the audio from the other project. I can deselect that and just take the channel and inspector settings, which includes pre-processing, routing, inserts, etc. And I can even include the automation. That wouldn't really make sense if I'm not importing the events and the parts. So I usually don't select that either. And I can set where I want to have those tracks copied to. And then lastly is before I actually import this, I can say on an individual track if I want that to pop into a new track or if I want this to be imported into an existing track. So let's say I have this drum mix. So it's named slightly differently, but if I'm importing this, this is effectively the same as my mix drums group track. So I can import it into an existing track. So that kind of just saves having to either, import a track separately, moving all the settings and inserts and whatever, and then removing the track. You could just import it directly into an existing track. So that is it for this video. That's my 5 main reasons why I use Cubase for mixing. Of course, this is not exclusive. There are many other things that I really like about Cubase. I have used Cubase a lot for mastering as well, so it is very good for mastering, but I've switched to Wavelab for mastering specifically because it has a lot of features that are just really, really handy and built specifically for mastering. It is nice that they're both Steinberg products, so there's not a huge difference between the two because it's the same company, but there is quite a few differences, especially in workflow and how they look. But yeah, and I wouldn't hesitate to use Cubase in a mastering session if I needed to, especially because of the control room features. And in fact, I do like the control room features in Cubase better than in Wavelab. So if I could have this existing exactly as it was, but in Wavelab, it would improve Wavelab. So yeah, Steinberg, if you're listening. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching and take care. See you in the next one.